Welcome, everybody, to our second session of the Harnessing the Science of Learning book study. Let's begin with our land acknowledgement. We acknowledge that ONlit-org's work takes place on traditional Indigenous territories. We acknowledge that there are 46 treaties and other agreements that cover the territory now called Ontario. We are thankful to be able to work on this land, and we are thankful to First Nations, Métis, and Inuit people for their care for and teachings about the earth. This acknowledgement reminds us of our responsibilities to our relationships and to the ancestral lands on which we learn, work, and live. So hello, everyone. Welcome to ONlit-org's Harnessing the Science of Learning book study. I am so excited that you'll be joining us tonight and over the next few months. Let's bring joy to our students by harnessing the science of learning together. So my name's Laura Bross. I'm a grade 2-3 classroom educator in the Avon-Maitland District School Board. I am also a member of the curriculum assistance team at ONlit. You can find me on X and Instagram at Miss Bross Learn, and my ONlit email address is posted there on the screen. So just a quick reminder of our schedule going forward. You might remember that this week we were supposed to be joined by Dr. Nidhi Sachdeva, but she unfortunately had a last-minute scheduling conflict. However, when life gives you lemons, you make lemonade. I reached out to Dr. Zach Groshell, and he agreed to join us tonight. I was so excited to add Dr. Groshell to this amazing list of experts. Dr. Zach Groshell is a teacher, instructional coach, educational consultant, and author. He is co-author of chapters 4 and 5 of Harnessing the Science of Learning and author of his own book, Just Tell Them, The Power of Explanations in Explicit Teaching. He is literally the perfect informed insights guest for tonight's session. He is also a podcast host, 2 of which are at the top of my notifications, Progressively Incorrect and the Direct Instruction podcast. You can also find him on X at Mr. Zach G. So here is our plan for tonight. Most of the time will be spent with Dr. Groshell as he shares his deep knowledge about cognitive load theory, types of knowledge, novice versus experts, the forgetting curve, and retrieval practice. I will take just a few minutes at the end to share our new additions to the Evidence-Informed Educator series and close with our next steps. So now that we are all organized, let's pass things over to our Informed Insights expert guest. Welcome, Dr. Zach Groshell.
Thank you so much. That was such a great introduction. I am really excited to be here. I love talking about this stuff. I've talked about it all today, and I've talked about it all last week, and I love what we're going to be talking about today, and I wish more schools had a chance to talk about it. So here we are with the next chapters in our book study, and you mentioned that book, Laura, that I wrote, which is here. The story of these 2 chapters is a little different. With Just Tell Them, my wife totally knew I was working on this book. With these 2 chapters, I kind of hid it from her because I knew she'd be upset if I took on another project. But Nathanial really wanted me to co-author these chapters, so I secretly added it to my list of things. And it was a crazy good time. You can see also Progressively Incorrect, that icon. I hope you can come and hop on. We have other guests that are part of this series, including Nathanial, including Dr. Cotting, including Scott Hill, people that are in this series who've been on the show to share their expertise. So if you feel like you found your tribe, so to speak, in this group, I think the podcast is for you. I'm also the director of the North American arm of this company called Step Lab, which is for instructional coaches. So I just wanted to mention that. Let's get going. So the chapter that the first chapter of the 2 that we're going to talk about on your screen are 4 different kind of areas, kind of larger, bigger themes that go across the chapter. And some of these things, just on their face, don't seem very controversial. On the other hand, they have big and important implications for instruction. And so I'm going to go through each of these for this chapter, but always be mindful that if you have questions, please put them in the chat. Laura, please direct me to the questions when they need be. We can make this more conversational, and it can be really, it can be impactful that way. The first thing is, and this is a bit of a perhaps a review if you showed up in the other one, would be to talk a bit about how we use cognitive load theory to describe the kind of mental architecture that all of us have. And I'll do a little test of your memory. Can you tell us what are the two main implications of cognitive load theory? And they have to do with extraneous load and intrinsic load. You do something with extraneous load, you do something with intrinsic load. Go ahead and type it into the chat. What are the things you do? What are sort of the instructional implications of this theory? Love it. Love it. Love it. Love it. So I'm seeing I go between different verbiage right here too. Actually, when Nathaniel asked me this test question, I gave a different response than was in our book. So pretty funny, but here's the fundamental sort of piece. And thank you for all those people that said they loved progressively incorrect. It's crazy that you even give me a chance to to listen to what I have to say. Here are the fundamental recommendations. The first is we need to optimize intrinsic load, and that in teacher speak or in plain speak is basically all of the materials that we want students to learn. They have some sort of load to them, right? A very complex math problem or a very complex text. It really can't be changed from what it is in its entirety. When you look at it, it has some sort of load, and that could be very overloading or that could be underloading. But we need to manage it or optimize it. And a lot of that has to do with breaking things down. It has to be making sure that we just give a little bit of it at a time, and we do things like retrieval practice, and we make sure that we don't just give kids whole tasks all at once because it will overload them. We build up to them being able to handle a very complex task by allowing them to use their long-term memories. And the other one was minimize or reduce extraneous load. Lots of distractions in the classroom, and there's a lot of things that don't need to be thought about or attended to. One of those, which is perhaps counterintuitive, or maybe it's not accepted in education, is this idea of having a child figure everything out when it comes to their learning, getting them to discover. That's classified as extraneous load because the goal of most teaching is not to discover, the goal is to learn the material. So getting rid of the discovery to focus them in on how to do the task or the skill is a great example of both of these. Optimizing the load that the material has and minimizing things that don't need to be thought about or that are irrelevant to the instructional design. So a little bit of a review there, but before I keep going, like why learning is hard. Learning is hard because a lot of the materials that we give students are very complex by nature. We're very ambitious as an education system that we want kids to grow and develop and learn things. And also learning is hard because there's often a lot of extraneous, or we should say unnecessary things they have to deal with. We can fix this and we can optimize it by us managing and controlling the instructional design. And so we'll keep talking about that. The next part is how knowledge powers all learning. We've all heard the slogan that knowledge is power, but do we really value knowledge as something that drives creativity, that drives critical thinking? That do we actually think of critical thinking and creativity as actually being dependent on knowledge or not even possible without prerequisite knowledge? that was kind of our next thing. And it brings us to two different types of knowledge, a way of classifying different types of knowledge. The first one is biologically primary knowledge. Now, just think before I reveal what's on your screen, what are some of the things that sort of spontaneously arise as skills in young children, in babies? I have two kids, and they sort of are like sponges in that they pick up certain types of skills without the need for me to sit them down and explicitly teach each of those parts to them and have them say it back and have them rehearse it and have them practice it. They just sort of learn it. What are some of those things that, as you kind of think to babies, put them in the chat, that kind of they happen more or less effortlessly and spontaneously. It's like we could say they have an instinct to develop these things. Put them in the chat. I'm curious what you have to say. Heck yeah. You're right on it. You read the book, right? Absolutely. Um, and I love, oh yeah, finding your way around. I love that, right? Certain things in this list I'll put on here. I think we can all agree on them actually. But before, let me put those out real quickly. So here's what the psychologists or the evolutionary psychologists, they kind of made a list. And things like speaking your first language. When students are when students are in our classrooms, right, they already come to us speaking their own native tongue, and that's true everywhere. It used to kind of be believed that certain folks in certain parts of the world were not as civilized, they supposed, as people in the Western world. But over time, with a much more with an evolution of understanding kind of humanity and a much more inclusive and open, minded approach to how the world works, we found very quickly that people in very remote parts of the world speak very sophisticated languages that are so complex and beautiful and amazing, and yet some of these people in very remote areas never have access to formal institutions. They don't have schools, and yet they learn their first languages, and some of the languages are thrilling to learn as a second language and very, very difficult to learn. And yet their children learned it without schools. All these other things you see here are similar. The kid falls down and they pick themselves back up. They get a lot of feedback from the environment. They need these things to survive. If we were in different times and you didn't develop these skills, what your ability to be able to thrive and hunt and gather and all that other stuff, it would be severely compromised, right? So a lot of these biologically primary skills are things we evolve to acquire, and we need them to live during a historical epoch in which there were not schools. We needed to use them. We need these skills to be able to gather food and hunt and communicate with each other. There's another set of skills, though, that we find in schools. And I put them on your screen. And these things, as far as we are aware, we've not evolved to acquire. We don't find these things effortless and easy. And unfortunately, in education, we do a little switcheroo where we wish that the things on the right side of your screen could be taught with the same methods that we learned the things on the left side of your screen. These biologically secondary skills that are relatively recent inventions in our history as humans, that only recently has reading and writing even been a technology that was accessible to the masses. That these things should be learned largely through discovery, through inquiry, through play. If you just kind of grow up in society, you will develop reading skills, you will develop writing skills. And what we know from especially the phonics movement that's happened in the past 10 years and in the 50 years prior to that is that these skills are not naturally acquired. They don't come about spontaneously. And the same is true with math. we unfortunately live in a time in which math is seen as this super special cool thing that you can discover math because mathematicians do a lot of discoveries. But reading and writing, we should teach it explicitly. And it doesn't really make sense from this type of lens, from an evolutionary standpoint. Mathematics is extremely abstract. It's something that has numbers and values and procedures that have been discovered by humans. And now we need to pass it down to people. We don't need to wait until kids reinvent the wheel or discover fire for the first time. And that's not the key to their hearts with math. The key to their hearts with math is the same as with reading and writing. We need to explicitly teach it. Um, I'm sorry if that hurts any feelings, but once I kind of got onto that line of thinking, my kids started to see success in my classroom, and I started to see brilliant mathematics formed right in front of my eyes. That was as a result of really great step-by-step explicit teaching. Um, so, um, the main thing to realize is that biologically secondary knowledge needs to be explicitly taught. There's a method that we've discovered as humans for how to transmit knowledge like this very efficiently and very effectively. We've known this since back in the 1960s and 70s with efforts like Project Follow Through and direct instruction. We've known this from Rosenshine's principles, which are based on the most effective teachers. We know this from randomized controlled trials in classrooms and in labs that explicit instruction is the is like rocket fuel for learning these biologically secondary skills. They're not that great for learning to speak your first language. Play with your kids and talk to them and show them objects, but they're not we're talking about what we learn in school, the stuff that's hard, right? So I've got a little Nathaniel did some cool stuff with these slides that I want to show you. Imagine that this is the working memory model. This is a child, and they're looking at kind of a complex task. And you can see these numbers and letters don't really make sense to us. They're sort of jumbled and it's not, you can't really see any patterns in there. And that's a lot of times what kids see when they're learning in kind of a discovery environment. They don't really see what the adult sees who already has the prior knowledge to understand the task. They're over there figuring stuff out through trial and error. Things are confusing, right? And but what would happen when this jumble of stuff goes into working memory? Well, as the animation just showed you, when really complex information that the student has to figure out goes into working memory, it overloads this very limited system that can only hold like 3 to 4 things at once and for only like 20 seconds at a time before working memory breaks down and the student doesn't get anything out of it. It's essentially forgotten. And if you've seen students who, man, why didn't you remember what I just taught you? It's often that. Too much information was presented at once. Too much was put on the student to try to figure out for themselves. Not enough scaffolding. Not enough explicit supports with things we're going to talk about. However, let's take a teacher here and make the teacher the mediator of this information. This teacher knows their stuff. They know how to teach their way out of their subject, and they know what needs to come first and what comes next, and what naive learners tend to stumble on, the misconceptions that kids have. And they've developed a repertoire of excellent explicit instruction. And let's take that same information. The teacher, instead of presenting it in this big old assignment that's this big project that the kid has to figure it out through trial and error, the teacher breaks it down for the kids like this one. And now patterns can be seen. And now all of a sudden the child is working in their working memory with a smaller number of bits of information that they can process readily. Teachers asking them questions about it, teachers giving examples. And when that happens, this kind of knowledge can go into long-term memory. It can become part of the child's repertoire. And when they go and solve complex problems and do complex tasks. They have tools that will enable them to make sense of complex math and complex texts. This is the whole idea that basically the teacher's the best positioned uh, actor in this to regulate the flow of information. And it's in probably the worst version of this would be just giving students a lot of unorganized, disorganized information and saying, go figure it out for yourself. Have a peer teach it to you who doesn't know anything about it. I'm sure that will work, right? Of course it doesn't work, right? As many of us have seen. Uh, Pounding our heads, on our desks. Why aren't they learning? Why isn't this fad thing working? It's because it didn't make any sense from a cognitive architecture standpoint, right? Um, and so the next time the student sees this information in the wild and they have A1 and B2 and C3 and D4 in their long-term memory, they see something new. What you know determines what you see. And so having those skills, those foundational skills like phonics and multiplication facts and procedures and concepts, all embedded in your long-term memory, it frees you to be able to interact with your environment. It empowers you in a way that nothing else does. Our superpower as humans comes from our ability to have unlimited stores of information and long-term memory. It's pretty cool stuff. And that's a very long way of saying knowledge is power. Knowledge is what drives all of our critical thinking and our creativity. Whoopsie. Oh yeah, that's pretty cool. Yeah, pretty cool little animation there showing the same thing. I love that. And so I'm going to show you a video now. I'm going to show you a video now of a teacher teaching with explicit instruction, and I'll put on a little a disclaimer here, and that was when this video was posted online, the majority of people thought it was amazing, thought it inspired them. And a small percentage of people were disturbed by it, I guess. They thought that the teacher was being controlling. They maybe have never seen explicit instruction in a very well-behaved class before. Maybe they had never seen uniforms before. I don't know what it was. But this video I'm going to show you, it was almost universally beloved, with a minority of people being clearly stating they would never want their children in this classroom, which is fine, right? Great, right? That's why we often have options for them. But then a large number of North American educators confessed that they thought that this type of teaching wasn't even possible in Canada and the US because our behavior is so bad, because our schools are so chaotic in some cases, because we have so many structural problems with our education system, that this could never even be effective or even be implementable. I'll show it to you right now. I want to know what you think. First of all, this was done by Pritesh Raichura. He's the teacher. And this is the tweet that went viral around the world on this video. And he said, direct instruction is joyful and leads pupils to success. Here's a clip where I use blank, but blank, but blank, but blank. I'd like you to identify the things he uses in the video and put it in the chat, just to get you to focus in on the kind of features, the ingredients of this teaching. And here we go. So get a bunch of look fors, type them in the chat. I'd like to hear what you have to say.
So there are 3 types of bonding that we can find in compounds. Let's read about those. Both hands on rulers. Lovely focus today, team. Starts off, Abdullahi.
There are 3 different types of chemical bond. Ionic, covalent.
Okay, pause there. I say, you say, covalent.
Covalent.
Try again.
Covalent and attack.
Good. Carry on.
Strong ionic bonding occurs between metal and non-metal atoms. All salts have a strong ionic bonding, e.g., example, sodium chloride, NaCl.
Beautiful reading, merit for you, and also merit for Hamza and Lena earlier for their reading as well. So, whenever you have a metal bonding with a non-metal, what kind of bonding do you get between them? Loud and proud. Khalees?
When a metal and non-metal bond, you get a strong ionic compound.
Really good. We call it a strong ionic bond. I say you say strong ionic bond.
Strong ionic bond!
Okay, who likes to put salt on their food? That's not really that good for you. But what is salt? What's the scientific word for salt? Do we know? Yara, I?
Sodium chloride.
Good, sodium chloride. How do I know sodium chloride has got ionic bonding in it? Oh, tell your partners, go.
Sodium is a metal and chlorine is a non-metal. So when you do a
3, 2,
reaction,
1,
you get
hands
sodium
up.
chloride.
Let's hear it. Loving these arms up, team. Go to Mia.
We know that it's ionic compound because it's a non-metal and a metal bonded together, sir.
Good, merit for you, Mia. Which bit is the metal in sodium chloride? On 3, 1, 2, 3.
Sodium.
And chlorine is the 1, 2, 3.
Non-metal.
Good. So therefore, the type of bonding is 3 words. Strong something bonding. Let's say all 3 words together on 3. 1, 2, 3.
Strong ionic bonding.
Smashed it. Right. Let's carry on. Next page.
All right, let me look at the chat. I'm curious what you had to write down. What do we got? 61 new messages. Okay, I can't read them all. Let's see. Ooh, we got some perky pace. Anita is in the house. Let's see. We've got some scaffolds. Love it, right? Step-by-step instructions, right? Oh, we're not giving him any time to mind wander, right? There's actually a clip of him describing this video, and the interviewer says, don't you feel like you're pushing them a little too hard? And he goes, of course, I'm pushing them because I care about their learning. Right? And he says it such a nice way. I just went, oh my goodness, right? I'd love to be in this guy's class. I love the pair share, and can't we all aspire to do such a snappy pair share like that? I mean, where 100% of kids respond, 100% of kids pop their hands up. I love it.
There are 3.
Here's what he wrote down, and I'll just let you read. It says he had high frequency and high participation. Sorry, I got to move stuff out of my way. Sorry about that. Get the chat out of the way. Thank you. Check for listening, right? Rehearsal, check for understanding. Lots of established routines, all hands up, turn and talk, slant and ruler reading. So this kind of folds in when we're thinking about great teaching and explicit instruction. The idea that these moves are learnable. These moves we can use to drive learning in ways that I've personally found really successful. I can't say that I used all hands up in my classroom like he did. That's where everyone needs to put their hands up. But certainly I felt pretty good about my cold calling and choral response at a time, right? These moves, these techniques are transmittable between different teachers, and we can use this to really facilitate great learning. It's unfortunate a little bit that, that we all don't see teaching in the same way. We have different views of teaching, but of course there's different approaches and there's different schools of thought. And certainly I would want my child to be in that class because I know they'd learn science. Something that I kind of, we just did a lot of projects and stuff, and I don't know, I feel embarrassed sometimes of my knowledge of certain subjects, largely due to the quality of the teaching, right? Let's carry on, and I want to make sure that I get to your questions. So these fit into sort of Rosenshine's principles in our chapter, the idea that the most effective teachers use a certain pattern, lots of questioning, lots of interactivity, lots of interactive modeling with loads of practice. And a lot of people just call that good instruction, and I call it explicit instruction and direct instruction. This model that has just endured for so long and so many teachers find successful perfectly fits with what we know about cognitive architecture, which is that the mind has this limited working memory that can only deal with a certain amount of things. And with an unscaffolded approach, I'm left to try to figure stuff out that I've never encountered before. So I'm going to use trial and error, and I'm going to learn misconceptions. My motivation is gonna dip because I keep failing. I mean, if any of you have ever tried to fix your house and you don't know how to fix it, like me, the YouTube videos are the most helpful thing, and the neighbors the most helpful thing, and just someone going and teaching me side by side is the best way. Otherwise, I feel awful, and I end up spending a lot of money getting someone else to fix it, right? Kids are the same with all biologically secondary topics. And here are some of that we mentioned in the book as things that you can kind of develop as norms in your classroom, things that create this fast-paced, interactive type of teaching. This type of teaching that I feel confident that you can get a school up and running with very quickly. If we all just agree on common norms and a small set of techniques that every kid experiences in their education, and we kind of accept the role of explicit instruction as the core of what we do. Continuing on, and why we forget and why we learn. This is where we're going to get into forgetting curve stuff. Now, taking a look here, Ebbinghaus back in like 1890 or so started to test himself and his children on all sorts of nonsense words and foreign words, and he found a predictable pattern, which is that if I keep on doing successive relearning, if I keep relearning the same material, that I forget it much less readily. And if I space it out in certain intervals, I'm going to extend my ability to remember this stuff, and I'm almost training some module in my mind to sort of feel like this is never going away, and creating like an expectation that if I can't forget this, I need this. So we retain information better with these spaced out intervals. A lot of explicit instruction is essentially prioritizing review of material. And I like to think of that king back in the Greek mythology. Was it Sisyphus, who was punished by, he had to push a boulder up a mountain, and the minute he would get to the tippy top of the mountain, this large boulder he'd put all his effort in to get to the top, it would roll all the way back down, and he'd have to start again once it got to the top. And that's what a lot of kids that struggle in school, that's how they perceive our education system. This teacher is going to give me something new every day, and I'm going to have to push the boulder up to the top of the mountain, and then tomorrow I'm going to have to start at the bottom all over again. It's like I'm trapped in a conveyor belt of information, and it just keeps coming. And we can stop that by prioritizing in our instruction a lot more review. Essentially reviewing by going slow to go fast. If I dedicate more time to review, they forget less of it. And so then I don't have to go back and reteach things so often. And the teacher ahead of me really is going to thank me, because they know my kids know this stuff in and out, because this teacher never lets this stuff go away. I have a really great video I'd like to show you, and I am mindful of the time. I'm gonna end right on the dot. Don't worry. I have a video of some really good review that I thought I just have to show you, because I just want to show you what the heck I'm talking about. This one is a teacher named Isla, and she's in Reach Academy, which was featured in the same documentary that Pratesh was in. Very similar style of teaching, younger students, different subject, different school, same approach, but this is a review session. So let me show you.
One and two. Number one, full sentences. Turn and track. Rishab, go for it.
Dara and Pan are currently on the ship.
And who can build on what Rishab is going? Where are they going on this ship? Kendrick? They are going to the north. They are going to the? North. Merit for Rishab, merit for Kendrick for Aspire. Why are they making this journey? Turn and track. Kanisha?
They are making this journey to rescue the children who have been kidnapped by the goblin.
That is a perfect answer. Merit for you for Aspire. Rescuing children who have been? Kidnapped. Who have been? Kidnapped. By the? Goblin. By the? Goblin. Thanks, Aman. Number 5. Who is the head of the Egyptians? Think. Everyone's going to say it in 3, 2, 1. Lord Far. Your turn. Who is his closest advisor and friend? Turn and track. Aria.
Father Quorum is his closest and advisor friend.
Merit for you for Aspire for answering in a full sentence without me having to remind you. Good job. Who owes the...
Oh, and she keeps going. she does a sweet review.
Hey, Zach, there's a question in the chat.
Oh, thank you.
Should these review sessions focus on multiple subjects or mainly on math and language? Like I know with Anita Archer's book, she talks about critical content going forward. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah. So when all material needs to be reviewed. Introducing it one time is insufficient. There's a great book by Graham Nuttall called The Hidden Lives of Learners, where he did a different type of research study in which he tracked the number of exposures to the material in a variety of subjects that the students needed to acquire this stuff. And he landed on at least 3 exposures. But then there's other research around the number of repetitions, spaced repetition, getting kids to review through retrieval, through deliberate practice, through interleaved practice is so important. So it's across the subjects. Now I'll show you this image right here is talking about like how if you get kids to study in a spaced out way versus cramming it, sure, they're going to do better on the exam on the crammed version, but if you space it out over time, they actually retain it for longer, right? But I think the question was should I do something like this where all of my study sessions for my different subjects are all the same material that I review? Or should I do something more like this, right? Where I'm going to sort of bring in different topics and interleave them and mix them up. The research is interesting. A lot of topics need to be mixed with each other. And we're talking about things like addition and subtraction problems. If you only get kids to do addition problems in a row, you move to subtraction problems in a row, the kid learns, I'm only doing addition today, and now I'm only doing subtraction, and they lose the ability to select and discriminate between those two things. So we mix those up. With the different subjects, there's a lot less need for mixing between them, but you're going to mix the topics of that subject with each other, if that makes sense. You're going to continuously do things like do nows and full review days where you go, okay, we've got 10 things that we've learned today in the last 2 months. I'm going to go through them with you, and this is mixed interleave practice review. In my class, I'm not going to let you forget this is the mantra, right? Whenever I teach something, it's always coming back, kids, right? And then your kids start to anticipate a different type of teaching. We sometimes divide the standards up by 180 days or however long your school year is, and we teach one new thing at a time for every subject. It's just not conducive to remembering. It's not really conducive for any type of learning. It's just sort of covering the material. So looking at it this way, I hope that answered the question. Did you get any more in there? Any more questions in there?
Just a few comments. Someone put in the comments spiraling. Like, how would you connect those two terms with like spiraling and interleave practice? Are they similar? Are they different?
They are different. So spiraling comes out of a different, and this is a little technical, I know. If you say spiraling and you mean the same thing as mixing in old things with new things, then great. It's just when spiraling was made, it was made to be like, I'll teach something, but I'm not going to teach it to mastery. It's going to keep coming back next year and the year after that and the year after that. And that's really problematic for a lot of reasons. It basically creates a situation which kids never fully master anything. So I don't use the word spiraling. I use the word interleaving, where we mix together review topics that are of a similar sort so the kids can discriminate. And I constantly bring it back through spacing, distributed practice. who cares what it's called though? You've got to get the kids to mastery, and meaning 90% threshold on their performance. And then you can start fading it out and start spacing it out so that, and it's not even that sophisticated of a system. You bust out your calendar and you take out your pen and you go, this is what I taught. And then you look forward a month, or you look forward 2 months, or you create a spacing schedule and you schedule it into your calendar. And you go, for my do now or my bell ringer, I'm going to put in some old stuff from this thing. I'm going to ask them questions about it. And if they don't remember it, I'm going to reteach it to them, right? As simple as that. I'm so aware of the time, but we're going to what time are we going towards exactly?
8:15.
Perfect. All right. I will zoom back out then. Our second chapter is here. And this is where me and Nathanial got to be a little spicy, right? We got to talk about things that we think are really counterproductive in education. And we of course cited everything, but a lot of it was, I felt it was more emotional than the last chapter. It was a little more snarky, maybe a little bit more passionate. And here are the things right here, which is essentially that the first one is pretty clear. Students will learn best when provided with a very stimulating environment. And we describe things like centers and rotations, the daily 5, discovery time. A lot of when I was teaching 4th grade, 20% of the entire week was meant to be dedicated to passion projects. And we called that Genius Hour. And this was at a school where dozens and dozens of kids had not been taught to read. And we were taking up very valuable, precious time and having them make friendship bracelets and things that, and playing in the soccer field and doing things that, sure, like everything is cool, right? Everything is, but what is most important? These institutions were spending all this money on to allow this kid to go on without being able to read is just malpractice, right? So this idea that like if you put a bunch of cool stuff in the environment, the kid will just teach themselves. It's been tried, it's been tested, and it's really an opportunity cost, because the best way to get kids to read and do math and learn all these cool subjects would be to have spend more time with a teacher than less, right? The second one was sort of following off that, being a guide on the side or a sage on the stage kind of idea. And you've already seen that the sage on the stage that of these 2 videos is highly interactive. The teacher is engaging the students through questions. The teacher is highly demanding that they initiate their own responses. So in a way, it's a bit of a false dichotomy in that the student is meant to sit passively, is meant to absorb, is meant to just, salute the teacher and say everything you say is correct and wait till the bell rings. On the other hand, the teacher needs to be the orchestrator. You're the adult, right? And you know the curriculum and you know how to break this stuff down like nobody else. It's almost weird to withhold that from students, right? To have this ability to do it and to put it on them to teach each other. It's not only ineffective, it's very inefficient. It's a bit of a waste of time. The third one we talked about, which I'll go into now, had to do with 21st century skills, which is sort of dying as a moniker, but it lives on in if you talk to enough people. One of the areas we talked about was this idea that like novices are different than experts, and that to develop some of those 21st century skills like critical thinking, creativity, problem solving, it's counterintuitive to some, but it's very wrong to think that to get them to learn how to problem solve is to give them more problem solving tasks. What we need to do is build them up to be able to do problem solving tasks. And that means also accepting the idea that problem solving, critical thinking, these big skills, they are not transferable to other domains. I feel a pretty good critical thinker when it comes to cognitive load theory. And the reason why is I've read a lot about cognitive load theory. I did my dissertation on it. I've read probably 400 papers on the thing, right? I've read the main seminal book on it that's dense but also fun. I am not a good critical thinker in many other areas, in archaeology, in medicine, in plumbing. And so in the research, they've kind of established this, and what you would say as a slogan is expertise is domain specific, but we don't really teach kids critical thinking or creativity. We teach them the foundational skills to be able to express those traits in specific domains. And they did this with chess, where they would take chess experts and they would do a bunch of board configurations that were common to chess, and the chess experts could memorize them just looking at them. They go, oh yeah, that's I don't know chess. They would do like, that's a castle rook swoop-de-doo, right? And they would name like a pattern. They could recognize all of the moves because they're experts. Novices had no idea what these moves were looking at them. They would see a board full of random pieces put in random places. However, what they did with these chess experts is they gave them random boards and they had them memorize them. Said, memorize this random board. And the expert chess player could memorize a random board at the same level of success as a novice, as someone who doesn't play very much chess. And that's the thing. It illustrates a point, is that these chess experts didn't learn some sort of transferable magical skill. They learned chess. And that's the same with every other thing teachers, you may get very, very good at explicit instruction, but the ability for you to transfer that to the golf course it's pretty much zero, right? So this idea of 21st century skills is actually, it's wrong-headed. It doesn't make any sense when you realize that cognitive scientists for a long time have identified these broad, wonderful goals of critical thinking and problem solving as not being things that you can teach on their own in isolation. You have to teach the subject for that to be expressed. Another thing was, is that we see this thing called this expertise reversal effect in research, where novices benefit a lot more from certain methods like these on your screen. Clear explanations, step-by-step instructions, working the problem for them, showing them how to do it. I wrote this book called Just Tell Them because it started to dawn on me that when a student was learning something new, what a waste of time it was to try to get them to work and problem solve and try to work it out on their own. Just tell them. Just tell them how it works. Show them how to do it, right? In 5 minutes, I can get you to learn something that would take you maybe weeks to discover on your own, right? Where experts, on the other hand, they once a student has acquired some of this knowledge, they can go off and do it on their own. And we see this with reading, right? If you want a kid to learn reading, you start by breaking down the phonetic code in the squiggles on the page, and you do other things when it comes to reading when they get older, of course, involving syntax and vocabulary and so on and so forth. But eventually we can all read. And when we read, we benefit from reading lots and lots of reading. Perhaps with a teacher asking questions to develop their ability to attend to certain parts of the text. But really, as we look at this continuum, novices benefit from direct teaching of like very structured, scaffolded teaching, Where once you know a little bit about it, you give them a decodable, and now they're on their own. And then you start to give them more authentic texts, and now you're starting to ask kind of inquiry questions. In a way, there's this beautiful continuum that we have kind of flipped upside down in education, where we want to treat all kids like they already know the skill and let them figure it out on their own. And what does that do? It overloads their working memory, it demotivates them, they don't learn very much, and sadly, we only have the instructional design to blame. And who is the designer? It was us, right? Right. Um, so, so thinking about novices benefiting from this kind of fully guided approach, where experts, meaning they know that particular domain, they can benefit from questions and prompts and more opportunities to practice with each other and perhaps come up with a new way of dealing with it and being creative with it, right? And so I think Nathaniel wanted me to kind of touch on this idea that long-term memory is not this just meaningless facts and dates, this place where we're trying to build up kids' long-term memories so they can be really good at trivia, right? And they can go and win a ton of gift certificates to the local pub when they're 24 years old, right? That's not the point of long-term memory. The thing is that long-term memory is the machine that drives our ability to solve complex problems. And if we give kids the incremental approach, sequential, systematic approach of foundational skills in kindergarten, and we build those up into first grade, into second grade, and we use lots of guided, explicit instruction, that by the time it's time to start making their own proofs and be a mathematician and be a scientist, that they've been armed with the knowledge that will enable them to do this. And to not do that is to really disadvantage kids in a lot of ways. And so let me just skip a little bit. I know that I'm excited. Oh yeah, let me do my last one. I think we just got enough time. The last one on here has to do with differentiation. And it's the number one question I get from educators when I present on explicit instruction, is that I've been told that I need to uber differentiate my classroom for all of these different learning styles and these different needs. Number one, I find it impossible. I've never been successful at it. Teachers tell me this all the time. Number two, I feel like when I do it, it leads to worse teaching overall for everybody. And I don't know what I do, because my values say I want to differentiate and include everyone. And the thing in front of me is telling me, like the actual evidence in front of me is telling me that my approach isn't working. What do you recommend, Zach, when it comes to differentiation? So let me give you what me and Nathaniel kind of worked out in the chapter. Let's take something like guided reading, right? Or something like the workshop model, the Lucy Calkins model, right? What happens is you give kids a lot of different texts, or you give kids a lot of different writing experiences, and you say, go off and do it. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to differentiate. I'm going to go to each kid, and one by one by one, I'm going to teach you. We know, though, from research that explicit instruction is very effective. Now do some math. You got 30 kids, and you've got to meet one by one with each of these kids, or maybe you create a small group. But either way, the minutes have divided out so much that each kid is getting a lot less explicit instruction than they would if you had given them a period of whole class explicit instruction. Even if that whole class explicit instruction wasn't perfectly aligned to their level, they at least got some modeling, some questioning, some practice, as opposed to this like 1 minute, one child at a time moving around, right? And so, so guided reading was created to kind of try to meet individual needs, and whole class is seen as sort of ignoring individuality. But the problem is that all of the kids are going to end up missing time with the teacher. They're going to miss out on a lot of opportunities to learn, and they're going to spend a lot of time unsupervised. And so, what is the solution, right? I love this. This is a quote from The Simpsons where Bart is put into the class down the hall that's supposed to be for the low kids, and he asks the teacher. He says, "What are we doing?" She says, "We're coloring or something." And the teacher, and he says, "Wait, so all of us need to catch up, and so you put us at a slower pace? How does that make any sense?" Right? And that's a lot of what happens when you're putting kids into these groups is you're reducing your aspirations for them, and you're giving them a lot of unsupervised time to do discovery learning in the absence of a teacher, right? And so we we try to address this idea that you don't need to do a lot of hyper differentiation like this, but you do need to differentiate. And what we would call it adaptive teaching, right? Where basically you're going to you're going to give a whole class lesson, and then you're going to monitor using formative assessment which groups might need more support, which students might need support. But if you see everyone needs support, you don't just put everyone off and then just start scattershot moving around the room and trying to address needs. You bring them back together and you reteach everyone together. And then you have that small table, that little kidney table in the back that you use for targeted small group instruction based on your formative data. But you're not creating sharks and minnows and guppies, and you're not creating these rotations and these honestly like these extremely fatigue inducing systems that end up leading to the kids just spending a lot of time doing stuff by themselves. You use whole class instruction to anchor your teaching, and then you address needs based on in the classroom data of who needs extra support. And of course, you use MTSS for kids that need a lot more support, and you use your other resources in the building to address real significant needs. With that being said, I look like I'm out of time, and I know that when you use someone else's slides, what you end up doing is you just go on and on like I just did and telling stories about stuff. I'm here right now for a discussion if anyone wants to unmute. Or Laura, I would love for you to look through that chat, and if you have any for me, I'd love to answer any of your questions.
Yeah, for sure. There's a couple that came up. Just to piggyback on what you just were sharing, someone asked, can you comment on how much time in a day students are engaged in this direct explicit instruction, and how much time for practice or downtime for students?
Love it. So practice is in explicit instruction. How I define explicit instruction is how other folks in the field have done, which is there's an I do, a modeling component, a we do or a guided practice component, and then there's a you do, a practice component. And there's going to be a lot of time for students to practice. Do you have extended periods where they're just sort of chatting and socializing? No, I break it up and I bring them back to me. I revisit the expectations. I answer misconceptions. I put them back into practice. But the kids are going to be practicing as part of this sequence, and it's a lot of time they're spent. I would say like modeling takes 10 minutes sometimes. It's quick, it's brief, it's very minimal in terms of the words you say. But then you're right into guided practice where you're working on problems together, you're working on the reading together, you're asking lots of questions. That's probably the next 30 or 40 minutes of your block. And finally, you're going to start to have them practice at the end, but you're going to keep reviewing that in the next lesson and the lessons after that, so that what I estimate would be about 90% of your lesson is practice or review of previous material, and only 10% is new information introduced through a modeling phase. Project time, you can have projects as part of explicit instruction. They just need to align with the teaching that happened. And I've seen a lot of projects that have nothing to do with what they just got taught. They're making cookies when they learned about the Oregon Trail or whatever it is, right? And they don't, I'm sorry to use an American example, and they don't align. So the project would need to leverage the skills the student had learned through the instruction that preceded it.
I love it. One thing I'd add in my class, like how you said, the practice is embedded throughout all the explicit instruction. I like to set little 1-minute timers, mostly for myself, so I keep that perky pace going. And I have kind of the students in my head based on my data who I'm gonna go and listen to and give feedback to during those little 1-minute bursts of practice. So I can kind of use those little bursts of practice as time to do some quick intervention, like picking the right kids. So I use my data to have that kind of idea in my head.
Love it.
There was a question. Do you have any suggested reading for adaptive teaching? Like, that's something I would love to learn more about as well.
Yes. So it's called responsive teaching in the book, but it's the same thing. And it's by Harry Fletcher Wood. And he is a colleague of mine for Step Lab. And he wrote this book called Responsive Teaching. And man, oh man, is that book book incredible. Also, Embedding Formative Assessment, again, not called adaptive teaching, but called formative assessment, by William and Leahy, is a classic book in the world of formative assessment. And if you get my book, I do talk about it a lot, because you can't, how do you know when you're going to proceed? How do you know you need to reteach it, right? So you can't talk about explicit instruction without formative data influencing you as a teacher. Yeah.
Okay. There was a question earlier about interleaving. Is it possible that interleaving could cause cognitive overload if review is new to the students?
Yes. That's why I don't give them review that's new to the student and don't call review new things, right? Review is all old stuff. And interleaving can certainly, some programs that are well designed for practice, sometimes they don't obtain mastery and the kids are practicing random stuff that they don't remember anymore. You have to be very careful that the success rate on the review is relatively high. It's going to be hard for them because they're forgetting it, but you should see an 80% or so success rate on the interleave practice. You shouldn't see 20% success rate, because that's just telling you spaced it out too much. And they've forgotten a lot of it. You need to reteach it.
Excellent. Okay, I'll do one more and then we'll wrap up. Teacher knowledge of the curriculum can be a big challenge for implementation. Like, what's your thoughts on that?
Yes. I wish we could have more opportunities for teachers to dig into the curriculum, more coaching around the materials, more PLC time where people can share with each other about how they're using the materials. The training for this stuff is so important. And it's not just the materials, the subject as well. A lot of teachers have lower subject knowledge, that they struggle. They struggle to teach new subjects like math. More time invested in our teachers is going to solve that problem through coaching and great PD.
Great. Okay. Well, that was awesome. There's some other great questions in the chat, and I'm looking forward to future chapters. And I think some of those will get answered as we learn more about literacy and mathematics and implementation. Okay, so thank you so much, Dr. Groshell. I am so grateful that you were able to join us tonight. You help us transform the evidence into practice. It's excellent. So before we send off, I would like to share our new additions to the Evidence-Informed Educator series. I did see someone in the chat say, if you're someone who is on your own in a school trying to advocate for change or do this in your own classroom, these visuals might be something that can help you with that and drive change in your own little school, your own little community. So remember that these visuals are designed to be a launching point to get learning started. Share one with a colleague, recommend the book and the recordings of this book study, and encourage others to learn about evidence-informed practices. So first we have the forgetting curve. We have updated the simple model of memory to now include forgetting. We have a visual explaining novice versus experts and how the worked example effect and expertise reversal effect align with those learners. We have types of knowledge. We have a brief summary of retrieval practice. We will grow the retrieval practice section with classroom examples as we dig into literacy and mathematics instruction in future chapters. And finally, the importance of fully guided instruction. And I love this quote that's from the book that makes sure it does. So now let's wrap up our session and plan our next steps. Session 3 will be on Thursday, February 20th, 7:15 Eastern Standard Time. We will be studying chapters 6 and 7, focusing on effective literacy instruction. Our Informed Insights guest will be Dr. Jamie Peevler. She's an educator, coach, researcher, and instructor at Mount St. Joseph University. She will explore effective literacy instruction, explicit instruction, and whole class and small group instruction. I can't wait to hear her discuss intensity and dosage and how it relates to small group instruction. So thank you everyone for joining us tonight. And thank you, Dr. Groshell. That was fantastic. I look forward to seeing you all again on February 20th. Let's bring joy to our students by harnessing the science of learning together. Thank you, everybody.